Hi, I am Patty Tawadros from Xercel. Welcome to Money Matters TV. Today I'm going to be joined by Rob Bovarnick from Bovarnick and Associates, and a little later we'll be joined by Ken Milner from Kraut Harris PC. So thank you for joining us today.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, so tell me, do you have a specialty?
I'm a business lawyer. My background is I did a lot of insolvency work, and then when I started my own practice about 12 or so years ago, I focused on general business. So I do a lot of corporate transaction work, a lot of commercial litigation, and a lot of business bankruptcy on both the debtor and the creditor side.
So what is the most popular thing you're doing right now?
I would say most of my work right now is on the corporate transactional side. The bankruptcy field is fairly slow at the moment.
That's good.
I guess it's good, not from the lawyer's perspective, but certainly from the economic perspective it is. And my litigation practice stays fairly constant, but I would say most of my time is spent doing transactions. I represent small to mid-sized businesses doing whatever they need to have done.
Okay. That's fantastic.
Yes.
I know I'm constantly trying to figure that whole side of business out. That's not my area of expertise, law. Yeah.
Well, that's why they have people like me, and as we'll find out later, Ken. So that's our day jobs.
Yeah. So with the kinds of transactions that you're doing, what do you find that people are looking for?
Let me answer the question this way. I look at myself as a small business owner, and I approach things with my clients from that perspective, and I think they appreciate that. I view myself as the owner of a small business, and it happens to be that what I sell are legal services. I sell time for a living. And everything I do is geared in that direction, that I'm looking at things as the business owner. And I think clients appreciate that I'm not looking at it as the way to bill the extra hour, but I'm looking at it as a way to do things effectively and efficiently, whether it's in a transaction or in litigation. In litigation, for example, while it may be better for me and my firm to have the litigation go on longer, what I find is going to make most sense for the client. Let's see if we can get this thing settled so they can get back to doing what they do, whatever their business is, and get back to their day job. And I think they appreciate that. And it's good for the business because I think you get a reputation as somebody who's very practical and pragmatic about things.
You know, it got to a point with a lawyer that we used for my condo association that we said, don't call him, email him, because he just seems to let it run so he can get to the next quarter hour.
And there are a number of things you have to watch with that. Is you have to fly spec your bills, because you call the lawyer and you make chit chat, and that's fine. That's all part of just the relationship. But you need to make sure that you're not getting charged for the chit chat. I'll tell you a quick story. Back at an older firm, I remember when we got a new phone system, and the phone system actually had the timer on it. I was shocked at how fast most phone calls are. Now, I and most lawyers, we bill in 6-minute increments. I remember back in the day, pretty much every phone call was a minimum of a 0.2, which would be between 6 and 12 minutes. When I actually started seeing the amount of time, I was finding most calls are 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And so you really need to understand that. And those little 0.1s and 0.2s add up. And so it's very important. I always tell clients this, you need to be proactive. You need to look at the bills, and don't be afraid to contact your lawyer and say, hey, wait a minute, let's talk about this, and just hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good to know. Good advice.
Thanks.
Yeah. So before we get to our question, I just want to tell you about this new service I have.
Okay.
So my company's been building websites for 15 plus years, and along the way we have built some very sophisticated platforms, and one of them is actually for you. It's for attorneys, very focused on what your needs are from your areas of practice, however many attorneys you have, having their profiles completely the same from page to page. You don't want to have one attorney, their profile doesn't look like the next one, and then connecting case studies and practice areas to each person's profile and making it really easy to navigate.
How do you differentiate that between what the big guys are doing, the LexisNexis and the Thomson Reuters?
Well, my background is usability, so everything I do is based on that premise that this is all about how the user is experiencing your website. I think that while they do take that focus, maybe it's not the same as a small business who can be more nimble. So if you're going to tell me this feature is great, if you tweaked it like this, it would make more sense. we're going to tweak it for you, and then we're going to roll out this feature for all the attorney websites that we're running, because that's what a small business can do. Where somebody like LexisNexis, they can't do that. You know, they have 25,000 people in the same platform. It's not workable for them.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I believe a lot of that applies in the law of business. One of the things that I say to clients is, my view is, you go to big law for those matters that big law can do.
Mm-hmm.
But why go to a big law firm when it's something that a smaller firm can do more efficiently, more effectively, and more nimbly? So there's a lot of similarity between the two.
Plus, we're a lot more cost effective.
That's also true.
So let me ask you this question. This is from Robert Farrell in Philadelphia, and he asks, what are some legal ideas that will help business people get bills paid on time and quickly? And everyone has that question.
Well, Robert, if you're watching, it's a great question. And one of the things that I always say to clients, and it sounds very self-serving, but in your contracts, put in an attorney's fee provision. In other words, if I have to sue you, you pay my legal fees. And the reason for that is, what happens is, so many times what a business is owed is a small amount of money, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, real money. But is it really worth it to go to court about it? Because lawyers are inherently expensive. And so you're going to run up the clock, and you're going to eat up whatever money you could get in trying to chase down your bill. If you have an attorney's fee provision in there, then what you do, you have your lawyer do at the very beginning, is you write a letter and you say, hey, Mr. Deadbeat, you owe the money to my client, and if you don't pay, and if I have to sue, not only will you owe the money that you owe my client, but you're going to have to pay me as well. And that is going to be significantly more expensive. I found that to be very effective, and it really is something that gets people's attention quickly.
So just a little deeper into that question, because I think there's times where you have the same client and you're billing them regularly over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years. So you don't want to get to the point where you're sending them a letter from your lawyer. How can you encourage them to pay you faster without it becoming...
Well, one of the other things that a lot of people do, and this isn't really a legal issue, but just as a practical issue, is you give a discount for fast pay.
Okay.
And I see a lot of clients like to do that. A lot of businesses will do that so that they can help with their cash flow. It's a bit of a challenge in this economy, no matter what you do, because with a lot of people, and I find this with a lot of my clients, is they want to pay me, mm-hmm. but their business is slow. They're waiting to get paid from somebody else. So it's a bit of a challenge, but I think that you need to be proactive. And you also, if you have the ability, stop providing the service. Sit there and say, you need my service. I respect that you need the service, but I need to keep the lights on. So if you want me to continue providing whatever the service is, you have to do what you've agreed to do, which is to pay me what you owe me.
Okay. Thank you. And if you have questions and you want to send them into Money Matters, here's how you do it.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says Send Us Your Questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
Ken, it's really nice to see you. Thanks for coming today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So you're from Kraut Harris, PC?
Yes.
So tell us, what does Kraut Harris do? What do you do?
Well, we're a small firm. We're 5 attorneys. We're out in Bluebell in Montgomery County. And the 5 of us cover a lot of ground. We'll do pretty much anything in terms of business and real estate and franchising and corporate work, but we also do a good deal of employment law. We have, of course, some people who will help us with litigation in case the business lawyers can't work out a deal on something, and if something has to do that. We also do a good deal of municipal work and zoning work. And as I said, the 5 of us cover a lot of ground.
Yeah. So tell me about limited liability corporations. Is that it's a popular thing to get versus a corporation?
Limited liability companies are still the the entity of choice in Pennsylvania for both attorneys and for accountants of businesses. It's interesting. What happened over the years is that back in the early 1900s, and what we had were a situation where people would form a company, and if they didn't form a business entity, if they didn't form a corporation, and they would just start a business on their own, something called a sole proprietorship, what would happen is that they would be personally liable for anything that happened with the business. Mm-hmm. And with small businesses, as I'm sure Rob knows, 40 to 50% fail within their first 4 years of operation. And so if a person went into business, he or she wasn't just risking business assets, but his or her house, car, bank account. So corporations started to become popular. Pennsylvania was one of the first to have a corporate law back many, many years ago. And everything was great except for one problem. Corporations are people under the law. And if you form a corporation, it means that the corporation now will get sued if there's a problem. It can sue and be sued. It's a person under the law. And so that's great. You protect yourself from personal liability if something goes wrong. But because it's a person, it means it gets taxed. So what happens is on April 15th, if the corporation made $100,000, now there'd be, $30,000 of taxes, and now maybe there's $60,000, $70,000 left in the bank account. Well, that $60,000, $70,000 in the bank account is wonderful, but it's not helping that individual pay his or her bills, and so the person takes money out of the corporation. What happens when that person takes money out of the corporation? That money got taxed again from the individual point of view. So back in the mid-1900s, they started with something called an S corporation. They changed the tax law, and the portion they changed was something called Subchapter S. Mm-hmm. And Subchapter S said, corporations, you can still protect individuals, you can still not worry, and you'll file a tax return, but instead of paying taxes, just let us know who owns the company, and we'll tax the individual. And that way, only be taxed once. And that was great. So S corporations became the darling of attorneys and accountants for small businesses. But there was a problem with S corporations. S corporations could only have individual stockholders, which meant you couldn't bring investors in to have equity. You couldn't have corporations invest into the company. And what happens if somebody dies? Now the estate is the stockholder. What happens if there's too many people? What happens if there's too much money in it? And so S corporations had a problem. And they said, well, gee, it would be nice if we could do something to protect people from individual liability and yet still not have this double taxation and not go through all of the hoops and rings that S corporations must go through. That great bastion of commerce, the state of Wyoming, came up with the idea of this limited liability company, or LLC, which worked just like S corporations, but you didn't have to have the meetings and the minutes and individual stockholders. You could have corporations own the stock, or other LLCs own the stock, or anybody else. So you had this great flexibility, and yet still had the personal protection, and you still had the one tax on the income. And so that's why LLCs are still the great entity of choice here in Pennsylvania and many other states.
So let me ask you a question, and I'm sorry to take time away from you, but my company was a C Corp first because I had foreign partners. Mm-hmm. When they left, after I ran out of losses to carry forward, I switched to an S Corp. Mm-hmm. Well, now what you're saying, I think, should I form an LLC and move my business into a new EIN, or how does that work?
The first person you're going to ask is not your attorney, but your accountant.
Right.
There are lots of good reasons for some people to still have S corporations instead of LLCs. There are certain tax benefits, certain benefits which a corporation can give you that an LLC cannot, in terms of employee benefits and things of that nature. So depending upon what you're offering to yourself and your employees, an S corporation may still be the way to go.
Okay.
I would have also said a year and a half ago, by all means, don't change, because in Pennsylvania, if you wanted to change from an S corporation to an LLC, you had to dissolve the S corporation and start a brand new LLC. And that's a lot of time and money and everything else. Well, the Pennsylvania entity law changed a little over a year ago in July of 2015. And we have made it much easier now to simply convert the S corporation into the LLC. And that's made it a heck of a lot easier for a lot of people.
Thank you. That was really good.
You're
know
young,
what
your
you're
taste
doing.
will improve.
So there's a panoply of different initials. Besides sub S, there's LLC,
Yeah.
there's LP, there's LOP, there's LLLP.
Yes.
What's the difference, and how do you tell your clients what's best for them?
The first thing I tell them is to avoid using initials. I cannot tell you how many people make a terrible mistake because they'll call themselves limited liability partnerships, but they'll try and form something as if it's a limited partnership. And there's a big difference between a limited liability partnership and a limited partnership. A huge difference in terms of tax, liability, and everything else. And so the first thing you have to do is to explain to people that using initials and using acronyms doesn't always work. First, explain to your attorney and your accountant what you want. What's your situation? And before I do anything for a client, sit the client down and say, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your home. What kind of income do you have? What are we protecting? What are we going to be risking? What are we going to be doing? Are you going to have more than one owner of the company? Who's going to run the company? Get all of that information out front. And once you have all of that, then you're going to say, okay, this is the entity that works for you. Limited liability company, limited partnership, limited liability partnership. There are so many different things, as Rob said, that we have to be truly careful before we can go ahead and just whip out a name or a number or a bunch of initials. And I think that Rob's question is a great one because too many people hear something and they think, oh, well, now I understand. And it just isn't the case. It's why you have to be careful about using a legal Zoom or one of those online type things where you think all you have to do is file a paper and now you're protected. It doesn't work that way. You have to form it right, you have to maintain it properly, and if you don't, then you might as well have not formed an entity at all.
And I think something else that's important is while the internet is great for lawyers, we use it all the time, and we use it as a place to start. You need, if you're a non-lawyer and you're going to the internet to learn about an LLP, an LLC, or whatever it is, use that for basic knowledge, but then go to your trusted professional and ask them, because that's their day job. They are charged with understanding the differences, and what Ken says is correct. What may work in Pennsylvania may not be the best if you're in some other state. So the internet is great, but as a non-lawyer, you should never rely on it. It could get you in trouble.
I definitely don't want to cause any problems. So I read something about a Business Entity Act last year. What was that?
As I mentioned before, Pennsylvania has always been a state that has taken its time in coming up with new ideas and new ways of moving. But in this case, this new entity law that passed 17, 18, 19 months ago now, this entity law is so far ahead that there's only a few other states that have what Pennsylvania now has. What we've done is taken a situation where instead of having an entity which was formed and having to dissolve that entity, which is a step-by-step process, now what you can do is you can take that entity and say, gee, Patty's accountant doesn't think this is working anymore. She shouldn't be an S Corp, she should be an LLC. And now what we can do is file some papers. You have to do it properly, of course, but you file the papers, and now what you can do is simply convert your LLC or your S Corp into an LLC, or vice versa. You can also merge companies now, where it used to take all sorts of paperwork and time. Now again, simple filings, simple ways to go. We have to be careful to protect the people. We have to make sure that things are filed properly. We have to make sure that we haven't changed the liability picture. But in general, Pennsylvania is now a leader in terms of being nimble, in terms of being able to make the changes that are so often necessary in today's economy.
So one thing I remember is that people would always file their company in Delaware.
Yeah.
Right? So why do people do that, and is it really still a benefit?
There are sometimes that Delaware corporations and Delaware entities work best. One is there are plenty of good tax reasons to do it. There are certain tax structures in Delaware that are still better than virtually any other jurisdiction in the entire United States. But it was funny, the real reason that a lot of companies, especially large companies, went to Delaware was not because of the tax structure, but rather because Delaware's corporate law gave tremendously broad powers to the board of directors. And it allowed the board to do a lot of things without shareholder approval. Okay? Well, back in, I guess it was 1988, Pennsylvania lawmakers looked at themselves and said, we're losing all of these franchise taxes, all of these huge companies that have become Delaware corporations. Let's out Delaware. And so in 1988, they passed this new corporate act. And they made it tremendously easy for directors to have certain powers, basically being like Delaware. Now, we had to put in some protections for the smaller shareholders so that they wouldn't get run over by a board of directors that just decided to push them out of the way or get back their stock at a low rate. And so they put in certain protections. And that's what Pennsylvania did back around the turn of the century. And they did a pretty good job of it. So the tax laws still are advantageous in Delaware, particularly if you have trademarks and other intellectual property. I do a lot of franchise work, and Delaware is still a tremendous benefit to a lot of people that want to license trademarks and use intellectual property. I know that would be of interest to you.
Yeah.
But for now, the protection of the people and for making things easier, Pennsylvania is just as good as Delaware, in my opinion.
So you were saying before that about a year and a half ago, Pennsylvania made a change with respect to the choice of entity. Have they also made some changes in the real estate field?
Yes, they did. Right about the same time as that took place, the law changed not just for Pennsylvania, but all states. There's something called the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, or RESPA, that everyone has to follow. It's a federal mandate. And what they tried to do is Congress said, geez, this is really, it's still very confusing. People still don't understand how this all works and what's title insurance and why does it cost so much and all of this. And so they tried to come up with better settlement procedures where people wouldn't go to settlement, decide they were going to sign a mortgage document and say, wait a second, we were told that the rate was going to be 5 3/4 and now it says 6 1/4. How did this happen? And so in order to make things easier for the consumer, to protect the consumer, the law changed so that banks and lenders would have to provide things at least 3 full business days in advance, the actual settlement papers. But there could be no changes to that document once it came. Well, that's a double-edged sword. What if you wanted to make changes because it turned out when you did the inspection the day before, there was a problem, and all of a sudden $20,000 had to be held up because of a roof problem or this or that? And what if there were big changes that had to be made? So we had to change, we had to make sure that there were protections still built in, but yet people, again, being nimble enough to get this done. And it's worked a lot better than most people thought it would work. People now just do their inspections earlier. They look at the settlement sheet instead of at the last minute. They get these things early. And no surprises. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that you do a lot of franchising.
Yes.
And that's always a fun topic.
It is a fun topic.
So what are you allowed to say who you've franchised recently?
Well, I try not to give, I try not to say the names of my clients. I think that's only appropriate. You can't do that without permission in any event.
Can you say things that rhyme?
What I can do is to tell you that I was very fortunate. I was just getting out of law school. I think that was during the Lincoln administration. I was fortunate enough to go to Cotman Transmission Systems, which at that time was the second largest transmission company in the world. And another local company, AMCO, was number one. They were number 1 and 2. They started together, and about 10 years ago, they got back together, and they're now just AMCO. But one of the things I've learned about franchising, and one of the things that I do tell people when they ask me, gee, you know, what franchises look good out there? What kinds of things look good out there? I can at least provide to our listeners some of the things they should watch for in terms of trends. Here's some things that you might want to look at when you're deciding whether a franchise is a good idea as a business. First, find something that's going to save people time. That's very important. We're in an age now where both parents in a family work. And people are running around all the time. We're overscheduled, we're overworked. And anything that will save people time is great. Second, avoid a real estate commitment, a heavy real estate commitment. It's bad enough that you're going to be paying the franchisor all the fees that the franchisor wants for the use of the name and the territory and everything else. But then you also have to pay the landlord, and that's a big expense. And while you're at it, you're going to be paying your lawyer, your accountant. You're going to be paying a lot of people over time. If you can eliminate the big real estate commitment, that'll help. Third, do something that gives kids a leg up. A computer tots, where you're taking your kid to preschool, but because both parents work, they have to go to the Y program and drop their kid off for a half hour first. Wouldn't it be nice if instead of doing a puzzle or watching a movie on television, that 4-year-old was learning the keyboard?
Are you selling us a franchise today?
No. But what I am going to tell you is that whatever franchise looks good to you, keep one thing in mind. You're going to get a document called an FDD, a franchise disclosure document. And that FDD is about 1,000 pages.
Okay.
And what you have to do is have both your attorney and your accountant look it over. And that document will also have the list of every other franchisee in the system. Call those franchisees.
Well,
ask them if they would do it again.
Thank you for joining us today.
That's my pleasure.
I would love to talk about this for a lot longer.
Me too.
So our next guest is going to be James Bonner from Gordian Knot Analytics Group, and we hope that you'll join us again soon. Thank you so much.